Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Impact of Social Media in Missing Children Cases. My name is Carissa Rano, and I'm with OJDP's National Training Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I will take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those of you wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Click on the name of the file, and then click the Download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions in the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute and help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be provided with a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. The certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. And finally, this event will be archived in approximately 3 weeks on OJDP's online university at www.ojdpou.org, where you can also view past webinars. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Melissa Blazing.
Thank you, Carissa, for that introduction. As Carissa mentioned, my name is Melissa Blazing, and I am the Region 2 Liaison with the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program. The Amber Alert TTA program has partnered with OJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center to host this webinar as part of our Amber Alert webinar series. In conjunction with our mission, this series works to bring together state, local, and tribal subject matter experts to present and discuss critical issues related to missing, abducted, and exploited children. To learn more about the Amber Alert program, our training and technical assistance opportunities, and to view past webinars, please visit our website link available on this slide. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to submit your questions via the Q&A box located on your screen, as we will answer these questions at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I would like to introduce and turn today's presentation, The Impact of Social Media in Missing Children Cases, over to our subject matter expert, Bob Breeden. Bob?
Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Breeden. I'm an associate with the National Criminal Justice Training Center, and I'll be doing the presentation today on the impact of social media. The objectives of our presentation is to understand what social media is, to review the most popular social media applications, and to discuss the potential evidence that may be gathered from social media apps in missing children investigations. I should start first by giving you a little bit of background. I think my bio is attached. You can look at it. I'm recently retired after 32 years in law enforcement. Much of that time was involved in cybercrime and working in Florida on cybercrime issues and child exploitation, internet crimes against children type investigations. When we talk about social media, obviously we're doing a 45-minute presentation this afternoon in this webinar, and this is part of a much larger class that I'll talk to you about later on that we host. And so this will be a very cursory overview. So I just want to make sure our expectation is set and that you understand we won't be going into extensive detail due to the limited time that we have available this afternoon. When we talk about digital evidence, it's imperative that law enforcement embrace the issue of digital evidence. The RAND report recently released on forensic evidence had several quotes that I thought were interesting specifically to the issue of digital evidence. First one was that law enforcement must not only be up to date, it must stay up to date regarding new evidence and techniques in order to best assist investigations. They also talked about the fact that digital evidence is as important today as firearms, fingerprints, and DNA, and that more cases are being solved based on digital evidence today than any other type of evidence. Recent current events relative to the election and other issues going on point out the issue of hacking and digital evidence and how critical it is for law enforcement to be able to conduct these types of investigations. So the question becomes, how do we stay current as investigators? How do we ensure that we're able to be aware of the types of digital evidence that exist, as well as how to gather evidence in those types of investigations? In our class, I talk about the issue of how easy it is to hide digital evidence, and we talk about how large thumb drives have become. There's now a 1 terabyte thumb drive that is available, and if you think about the amount of digital evidence that a bad guy could store on a 1 terabyte thumb drive, it's just amazing. And how easy would it be for the bad guy to hide that small thumb drive in a place that would be very difficult for us to find it and be aware of it. So it's important that we are constantly looking at the new and emerging technology. So how do you stay current? And in our class, when we're in person, we talk about the types of resources that you can stay current with. Obviously, this webinar is one of those ways. There's other trainings available through a number of different resources in order to stay current. I use a couple of different websites to try and stay current on not only digital evidence issues, but social media issues, looking at advancements in hardware and software. One of those websites is CNET at cnet.com. The other one is TechCrunch at techcrunch.com. And there are numerous other sites out there. By no means are those the only ones, but it is imperative for you to figure out how, in fact, you are going to try and stay current and monitor the developing trends as it relates to digital evidence and social media. When we talk about social networking services refers to the means of interaction among people in which they can create, share, and exchange information and ideas in virtual communities and networks. Social media sites depend on mobile and web-based technologies to create these highly active platforms. If you think about years ago, for those of you who have been involved in social media for a while, it used to require that we would sit down at a computer and we would open a browser and we would go to, MySpace or some other social networking service and sign in with our username and password. That is still a possibility today. There may be people that are using computers to sit down and go into their social networking services. But what we're seeing is that social media and social networking is much more of an interactive and mobile operation today. And so that brings in the whole issue of cell phones and tablets and the potential for capturing evidence from cell phones and tablets. And we'll talk about that in a moment, and we'll talk about the potential problems with that as well. Most of the social networking services, as I said, are web-based, but today they also provide for free apps that we can download on our phones and tablets. There are over actually 350 different social networking sites. Many of those we've never heard of because they are in languages that we don't speak and that we're not actively using, and so many of those we're not even aware of. When we talk about the scope and scale of social media and specifically look at how it's being used by the vulnerable population that we're focusing on with missing children, we find that the statistics point out that it is extremely popular with young people. 89% of teens use social media. 71% currently have multiple profiles on different platforms. 51% of teens use social media sites daily. 71% of teens have a Facebook account. In talking with people around the country, we found out that while they may have a Facebook account, rarely do they use it for the bulk of their communication, especially with their friends, because oftentimes they're friends with their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, and so they're not extremely involved with Facebook. Even though they may have a Facebook account, keep up with friends, they're usually not communicating heavily with that. There are other apps that are being used for their communication. And we've seen how the use of social media seems to be impacting people both applying to colleges and applying to jobs. 8% of people in the U.S. have been, ages 16 to 34, have been turned down for a job because of their social media content. Many colleges and employers are looking at the content of social media activity for applicants and making a determination about their judgment and their behavior based on the content of their social media. And there's no shortage of stories within the media about the inappropriate behavior of both law enforcement and sometimes prosecutors as it relates to their personal social media activity that have brought discredit to them or their agency and created public problems for them within the media. And so it's imperative that we are careful about our social media activity and content. 47% of kids have looked up a website their parents would disapprove of. 50% of kids, 10 to 17, have posted risky comments or photos online, and 22% of young people admit to using a mobile device to hide their online behavior. So what does this mean for us as investigators? Well, if we know that these numbers are correct and that many of the kids are trying to hide the behavior that they know their parents would disapprove of, then when we're doing our investigations, we have to acknowledge to ourselves, at least right up front, that while we're going to interview the parents are probably going to have very limited knowledge about the activity their children are doing online. I often ask students in the class, how many of you think you know everything your child is doing online? Very few people raise their hands, and usually the ones that raise their hands have either a very young child or either they limit their children and not let them have much internet access. Today, with free emails and so much connectivity, it's very difficult, and with children getting cell phones at younger and younger ages, it's very difficult to really know what your significant other or your child is doing on the internet. And so when we're doing these investigations, we probably have to broaden our interview scope to talk to other people that this child may be involved with. Not only the parents, not only the siblings, not only extended family, but also their classmates, also their friends in the neighborhood, their teachers. More and more of our students are involved in electronic submission of their homework or their research projects and so on and so forth, even testing online. It may be that their teacher is aware of an email address that they use or some other platform that they're involved in with social media activity that may have some bearing on our investigation. And so obviously with this level of hidden behavior, we're going to have to really dig deep in order to try to find what all their social activity footprint may include. 46% of children ages 10 to 17 have received a message or a picture their parents would disapprove of due to sexual content. So basically half of the children involved in social media have said there's an inappropriate behavior going on. What does that tell us? The reality is that tells us that there's a lot of risk on the internet, and it's imperative for young people to be educated about that potential risk and about the fact that they're probably going to be approached with inappropriate content or inappropriate comments on different platforms, and they need to be prepared in how to deal with that. 70% of teens have hidden their online behavior. In years past, when computers were popular, we always said put the computer in a common area of the house so that the parents can walk by and monitor what the child is doing. In today's world, with everybody having their own laptop or their own tablet or their own cell phone, those days are gone. Being able to monitor their behavior is just not something that happens today in our current technological environment. And it's even worse than that because of the Decoy Apps, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. 53% of teens admit to clearing their browser history after browsing on an internet browser because they don't want, siblings or parents to figure out what they're doing on the internet or what websites they're visiting. 34% of teens hide or delete messages, photos, or videos in order to prevent getting in trouble with family. Those statistics, by the way, came from a website called Growing Wireless. At the end of the presentation, you'll find a list of citations for statistics in this presentation today, but I'll just mention the Growing Wireless website is extremely good from a standpoint of statistics and research and surveys, not only on social media, but also on digital evidence issues and cell phone issues, which today cell phones are becoming very hand in hand with the whole issue of social media. So I mentioned Decoy Apps. Decoy Apps or photo vaults. There are numerous apps under this category out there that people can download from their App Store or Google Play on their phones or tablets in order to hide content on their devices. It's interesting that when we do our class and we ask how many of you have heard of Decoy Apps, usually very few people in the class have actually heard of it. The problem is that information can be hidden inside these applications and it wouldn't be available to the naked eye. So as a parent who's trying to stay on top of things, if they're monitoring their child's behavior on a shared tablet or maybe checking their child's phone, the children are smart enough to know that they can download these Decoy Apps or photo vaults and they can move the content of their communications. That could be photos, videos, documents, text messaging, or email over into these Decoy Apps so that mom and dad would not see it. So just because mom and dad have not seen that kind of activity or communications that brought, concern to them, it doesn't mean that it's not on the device. It doesn't mean that the child's not using a shared device to have communications with a pedophile or an abuser. It just may mean that the child is hiding that on their app. And of course, that would be common also on their own device as well. Obviously, this is not restricted to just child exploitation cases. These types of apps are used by other criminals and terrorists to hide activity on their phones and devices as well. Some examples of the Decoy apps include Poof, Vaulty, the Best Secret Folder, Hide It Pro, SpyCalc, and Smart Hide Calculator, Audio Manager, and Hide It. When you look at the app on the screen, it looks like just any other app. I actually have one I've downloaded that is a calculator. If you were to tap on that calculator, it would open up and it would look just like a calculator, and it functions as a calculator. In fact, it is.
Start again on the Decoy Apps app where you're discussing the calculator app.
Okay. Apologize for the technical glitch there. I hope everybody's back on the call now. So we were discussing the calculator as one of the Decoy apps. And I was explaining that when you open the app to the naked eye, to someone who doesn't realize it's a Decoy app, you're not going to realize there's something hidden in that app. The one I have is a calculator. I open it, and it functions as a calculator. In fact, it is the calculator I use on my smartphone. But when I downloaded it and set it up, the Decoy app allows you to put in a secret code. It's a 4-digit number. And once you put in that code followed by, I think it's the star sign, it actually opens up. And you can hide videos and or pictures in that particular one that I have. This could be downloaded on my tablet as well if I chose to. As I said, there's a list of them on the screen of a number of the other ones that exist, and there are tons of them. I would encourage you to go to your App Store, whether you have an Android phone or an iOS Apple phone, and look at the types of different apps that exist that are in the realm of Decoy apps. The other one I'll mention is the Audio Manager. The Audio Manager is also one that is extremely popular, and it seems to manage the audio from your music collection on your phone. But again, given the proper code, you can go into it and actually open it up, and you can hide all kinds of things in it. This is particularly problematic because not only could we miss it if we were looking at the device, but a forensic examiner could miss this in a forensic exam as well. Forensic examiners are pretty well aware of how they can examine the device or the tablet and be able to determine if it could be a Decoy app, because it would be a lot larger file if it contained hidden videos and photographs than if it were than the size of the file when it was originally downloaded, or the way it exists before it's used to decoy or hide photos or videos or whatever else may be in it. When we talk about devices for social networking, oftentimes, we know that cell phones are a common device that's used for social networking. And I talk about, in this screen, in our class, what are the devices on the right-hand side of the screen? And most people recognize that those are versions of an iPhone. And then we ask, well, what are the devices on the left side of the screen? And most people think, well, they're iPhones too. In fact, they're not. These are iPod touches. And so oftentimes parents of younger children don't want their child to have a cell phone, but they will purchase them one of these iPod touches. If you haven't put your hands on one of these or looked at one of these, I encourage you to go by an Apple store or Best Buy and just look at the iPod touches. They're a little thinner, but they look very similar and have a lot of the same features. Oftentimes parents think that they're protecting their child by not giving them an actual cell phone, but giving them the iPod Touch so that they can't potentially be exploited or not have a cell phone and not be able to communicate. The reality is, with the apps that are available to young people today or to anyone today, they can do just about anything with that iPod Touch that you can do with an iPhone, except for actually connect to the cellular network. So in other words, with the iPod Touch, they would be restricted to Wi-Fi connectivity only. But they can certainly download apps that will allow for phone conversations. They could have a virtual phone number so that when that iPod Touch is connected to a Wi-Fi network, they could receive phone calls. They could make phone calls. They can certainly send text messages. They could certainly browse the internet, and they could do other types of social media apps like Facebook or many of the other social media services with the apps downloaded onto that iPod Touch. So one of the things we have to be aware of is when we're talking to the parents, it may not just be cell phones that we have to be concerned about. We also need to know what connectivity that child has. And many of you are aware, I'm sure, that many of the gaming services, the gaming devices, have the ability to connect to the internet as well. And we have seen cases of exploitation where the victim was accessed by the perpetrator through a gaming device. And so there are numerous ways that children are being accessed and exploited. When we look at the issue of tablets, there are a ton of different tablets that are out there. Most of them are using either Apple operating system or Android operating system. If you go out today to purchase a new tablet, the first decision you're going to have to make is what brand of tablet, what brand you're going to purchase. The second thing you're going to have to be concerned about is what size storage you want in your tablet. And then finally, before you can purchase it, you have to know, do you want a Wi-Fi only tablet or do you want Wi-Fi and cellular connectivity? What this allows for is for your tablet to be connected to the cellular network just as your phone is connected. And so one of the things that we have to ask in an investigation involving a missing child or any other case really is if they have a tablet, is it Wi-Fi or is it Wi-Fi and cellular? If it is cellular, then obviously we'd want to check was that tablet connected to the cellular network, and if not, what was the last tower it was connected to? If it's currently connected, what tower is it connected to right now as part of our investigation? Keeping in mind that having a tablet of this nature gives someone the ability to stay in constant communication. If it's a Wi-Fi only tablet, they either have to be connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot, or many people don't choose to spend the extra money to purchase a tablet that is cellular enabled. Instead, they simply use the hotspot on their smartphone to connect the tablet. So with the tablet, they're able to do just about anything they could do on a computer. And so portability of social networking and portability of accessing and exploiting children has come a long way in the last few years from a standpoint of technology. So what do these tablets and the cell phone and the iPod Touch create for us in the form of evidence? Obviously, there's the potential for remnants of their social media activity to be on this device. And we'll talk about some of the evidence that we can get from social media services in just a few minutes. But the problem that we're faced with these tablets and handheld devices, cell phones, is the issue of encryption. And for any of you who have been involved in investigations relative to digital evidence or cell phones, you're aware that encryption has become a huge issue. And it's also been in the news pretty heavily with the San Bernardino shooting case involving the terrorists, and Apple refusing to honor the FBI's search warrant. Ultimately, the FBI was able to break into that phone, but since iOS operating system 8.0, Apple has written their operating code so that not even they can get in the phone without the password. And so when someone sets up their phone, they have several options. With Apple phones, you can use a 4-number or 6-number PIN, where you have to know that number in order to get into the phone. Without that number, the phone is locked, number one, and it is encrypted. And so there's really no way to do a forensic exam or to copy the information in that phone. Now even, especially with the tablets, many people are using an alphanumeric code, which makes it even that much more difficult to get into because you're using some combination of letters and numbers. With the Android phones, most of the time we see people using the convenience of the swipe gestures. And so there has been some creativity on the part of law enforcement to try and look at the residue that may be on the screen from the swipe gestures, from the oil on their hands, or debris on the phone to try to figure out what code they may have or gestures. But the truth of the matter is it is very dangerous to experiment with the phones and try to break the passcode because most of the devices today, especially in Apple phones, have it set up that after a certain number of attempts, the phone wipes itself. And so it's strongly recommended that law enforcement not attempt to get into the phone or not attempt to figure out what the password may be because of the potential for destroying the evidence on the phone if it is set to wipe itself after X number of attempted entries. We do have a kind of an interesting story of one of our instructors who is a forensic examiner in Oregon, who became aware that in the interview with the subject, he was allowed to use his phone, to access his phone. And so he went back and pulled the video recordings of the interview room, and he actually was able to focus in and blow up that portion of the interview and see what the code was that the bad guy was using when he opened his phone to get into his phone. So that may be a tactic that we could try as well in law enforcement and trying to be creative to ensure that we can get into these phones. But the reality is this, oftentimes we're stuck with asking the owner of the phone for access to get into the phone. If at the initial interview or the initial contact, you can get the person to unlock their phone and you can turn off the lock screen or you can change the lock screen to something that you're aware of, that's probably the best bet. If they're willing to give us the access code, then obviously you could just provide that access code to your forensic examiner when it comes time for them to do the forensic exam. It is a huge issue relative to the issue of encryption, and we'll see where it goes in the next few years. So we're going to talk now about some of the mobile apps. As I said earlier, we're so limited on time here that we're not going to be able to get into depth on them. But we wanted to touch on some of the more popular mobile apps and then give you a quick case example at the end. So we'll jump into this with Facebook as the first one. I'm not going to belabor the statistics, but we've provided you with the statistics here about how many people are using Facebook today, 1.79 billion worldwide. What I do want to point out is the monthly active or daily active mobile users now well into the 1 billion range. And so what we see is that more and more people are using Facebook and other apps from their mobile devices and less so from standalone computers. There's somewhere between 300 and 350 million photos that are uploaded to Facebook alone each day. To date, there's been about 250 billion total photos uploaded to Facebook. This is important because photos, whether it's on Facebook or any other social media app, could be extremely valuable to us because of the aspect of geotagging or the embedding of metadata into the photograph. And we have a couple of slides later on in the presentation that explains what geotagging is, and we'll get into that. 4.7 billion likes and comments are posted daily. Facebook's available in more than 70 languages, and in fact, there are 5 new profiles created every second. You know, a lot of times we will not be able to conduct an investigation from Facebook activity, but oftentimes we certainly can gather intelligence about our suspect and or our victim or witnesses from their Facebook profile if it is open and public. A quick searching tip for you: if you know the subject's phone number, you can put that in the search bar on a Facebook page, and it will bring up their profile. So if you don't know if your suspect or your victim has a Facebook profile, but you have their primary phone number, you could actually go to a Facebook page, your Facebook page, and you can put in that phone number, and if it's affiliated with any Facebook account, it will actually bring up that Facebook profile for you to review. So the types of information that we can get from Facebook includes the user's neoprint and the user's photo print. Obviously, these items require a search warrant. The neoprint is simply an expanded view of the user's profile. This is given to us in response to the search warrant in a PDF format. It's printed out for us. It's provided electronically, but obviously you can print it out, and it will include all of their current profile information, all of the wall postings that they've made to their account, messages to and from the user through Facebook Messenger that have not been deleted by the user. The photo print is a compilation of all the photos uploaded by the user that have not been deleted, along with the photos uploaded by any other user in which your target has been tagged in that photograph. The photo print is also delivered to us in a PDF format. It's important to realize that if somebody goes in and deletes a posting that they made on Facebook or a photograph that they posted on Facebook, if they delete content from their Facebook account, it is gone forever. You are not going to be able to get deleted content from Facebook because it is not stored at Facebook. So when you do a search warrant to Facebook and you get this user neoprint or the user photo print, it is possible that if the suspect became aware that they were being investigated and they went in and deleted certain posts, that you will not have it in the response from Facebook. And it's not that Facebook is withholding it from you. It's simply that once it's been deleted by the owner of the page, it's no longer available. It's no longer on the servers at Facebook. For those of you who have not requested information from Facebook, Facebook has built a portal that allows for online access to records and submission of subpoenas and search warrants. If you go to facebook.com/records, you can request access to the portal. They'll require you to put in your email address and request access. They will verify that it is a government account. And then once you have access, this is what the portal looks like. You see that at the top you can do preservation requests or records requests. Preservation requests are good for 90 days. They do not require any longer at Facebook that you do a preservation letter on your agency letterhead. You can simply do the request literally from your phone or car or tablet at the scene of your investigation if that's important to you, because they don't require a preservation letter any longer. This is the Facebook portal. If I had in this screenshot, if you had pending requests to Facebook, they would appear under the My Request section here at the bottom, and there would be a status of where your request was and if it had been completed or not. This is a screenshot now of the request records section. You can see that you can put in your case number. They'll ask you in the drop-down bar what type of legal process you are submitting, whether it's a subpoena, a search warrant, an exigent request, and so forth. And then you can fill in the other blanks. And then you can see that you can actually attach a document. So this is where you could electronically attach a PDF copy of your subpoena or search warrant or any other information that you felt was important to provide to them. This portal is monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by the security offices at Facebook. One of those is in Israel. The other one is in Menlo Park, California. And so there will be somebody monitoring this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if it's entered as an exigent request, there'll be somebody there to help you try to get the records in case of an emergency. Kick Messenger. If you have children, you probably have heard of Kick Messenger. Kick Messenger is a messaging service that is extremely popular with young people. It's located in Ontario, Canada, and as such is governed by Canadian law. Kick usernames are the only unique identifier that will identify an account and may include lower and uppercase letters and punctuation or punctuation. Kick is what we call a cross-platform messaging service, which means that it doesn't matter if you have an Android phone and I have an iPhone, an Apple phone, both of us can download the Kick Messenger and be able to communicate with each other through Kick Messenger. I should mention that in the early days, law enforcement had a lot of frustration with Kick, trying to get communications from them, trying to get legal process responses from them. We've communicated, our team has communicated with them, and we find that they seem to be law enforcement friendly and willing to cooperate. It's just that they have a very, very small staff, and that oftentimes it's not a matter of ignoring us, it's a matter of the workload in trying to respond to subpoenas and search warrants submitted to them. Snapchat. Snapchat's another very popular app, not only with children but with adults. If Congressman Anthony Weiner had been aware of Snapchat, he might still be in Congress today, right? Snapchat's a smartphone app that provides a new way to share photos and videos using the camera phone in real time. The user can select a preview time of 1 to 10 seconds that the recipient is going to be able to review the picture or the video, at which time it will then erase itself on the recipient's phone. The user or the sender can set their phone to either save the picture or the video in their phone, or they can just have it sent through Snapchat without saving it on their phone. So it's possible that in a forensic exam of the suspect's phone, you will not find the images or the videos that they sent to your victim, because if they were using Snapchat, they may have had their Snapchat set not to save the images and the photographs that were sent. It's possible to send to another Snapchat user or strictly to a phone number a snap, and then it will require the recipient to download the Snapchat app in order to view the content of the snap that was sent to them. And what can we get from Snapchat? Well, with a subpoena, we can get subscriber information, typical information like the Snapchat username, the creation date and time of their account, the email address and phone number that are affiliated with that Snapchat account. With a search warrant, we can get the content of unopened snaps. The problem with Snapchat is that none of the content resides on the Snapchat server. And so the only place, if your victim and your suspect have been communicating through Snapchat, the only place that you're going to be able to see the content of that communication is on the two devices that are being used with those two accounts. And as we talked about earlier, with the issue of encryption, especially if the victim and or suspect have not cooperated and given you access to their devices, it's going to be very difficult for you to see the content of their communication. It is possible to get unopened snaps if they're less than 30 days old with that search warrant, because unopened snaps that have not been delivered to the recipient will sit on the Snapchat server for 30 days and then they will be deleted. So very difficult to get content of Snapchat activity unless you get access to the devices involved in it. As I said, the video is not stored with them or images are not stored with them, and we've already covered that. So Grindr. Grindr is a geosocial networking app. This particular app is geared towards the gay community. Geolocation apps are particularly of concern because of the potential for exploitation by being able to see where your victims are at or how close they are to you. So the geolocation feature allows users to locate other users within close proximity through the user interface that displays a grid of users from nearest to farthest. Tapping on the picture will display a brief profile for that user. So on the left-hand screen, you see the Grindr app with all of the thumbnails. And then if you tap on one, like in the second row, I tapped on that one, and that comes up. What comes up is what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. This is the profile for that particular user. You notice they have biographical information or whatever they may put into their profile. There is the ability for an individual private chat, and you notice the favorites so that you can monitor when people have signed in to their Grindr application. We have seen exploitation of young people who are signing into this app. We've actually used it investigatively by creating an undercover profile posing as a 15 or 14, 15, 16-year-old boy and have people make arrangements to meet for sex and used it as an undercover tool to arrest bad guys that are accessing or trying to access children. Some of the problems that we've seen by law enforcement with these types of apps, especially Grindr, include robberies, murders, stalking, and exploitation. There have been a number of high-profile cases where a person would set up an account on Grindr, and they would go on and talk with other people and invite that person over or get invited over to the person's residence. And then upon arrival, their intention was not to meet for sex. Their intention was to meet to rob the person, and in some cases actually murder the person in a few high-profile cases. The issue with exploitation is that it's possible by moving around for a person using the app to determine the residence that another user is in or the apartment building that another user is in, because as I said, it geolocates you and it shows you within feet how far you are from another user. There are other apps that are similar to this. Scruff is another one that is a geolocation app that is popular in the gay community. Tinder is a geolocation dating app in the straight community, and Scissor and Her are similar apps in the lesbian community. So let's move into WhatsApp. Many people in the United States have WhatsApp, but it is extremely popular, especially in South America and a number of other foreign countries, because it allows, again, for a cross-platform instant messaging service on smartphones. The users can send text messages, images, videos, audio messages, and their location using mapping features on this device. I live in South Florida, and there are a number of, obviously, residents in South Florida who still have family in certain South American countries, and oftentimes it's very popular with them because they can communicate with their family members using WhatsApp without using texting service. This is what we consider a voice-over internet protocol app, and it allows for internet communications with no long-distance charges and no text charges. WhatsApp is based in California. It was purchased by Facebook from the creators in February of 2014 for $19 billion. They handle 42 billion daily messages. They have about 1 billion active users worldwide. They transmit about 400 photos daily. They do about 100 million phone calls daily. And here's the problem for us in law enforcement. All of these services are fully encrypted end-to-end. There's been a very big concern in the terrorism community and the intel community because WhatsApp is such a secure communication tool, and there has been some information released that, they are aware it is being used by terrorists to allow for secure communication because it's encrypted from end to end. And what that means is if I send a message to you through WhatsApp, it is encrypted from the moment it leaves my phone until the moment it arrives at your phone. So even a law enforcement intercept would be problematic because it would be encrypted and it would be scrambled and we wouldn't be able to see it. And of course, none of the content of WhatsApp communication, whether that's photos or phone calls or text messaging, none of it resides on the WhatsApp servers at Facebook. And so it would be very difficult to get the content of a WhatsApp communication, again, unless we can get onto the devices. I mentioned briefly voice over internet protocol. VoIP applications Many of those exist, and you can search for those. They allow us to do voice communications and other multimedia communications like fax and texting and voice messaging over the public internet rather than through our public switch telephone network. So examples of that would include Google Voice, Skype, WhatsApp, and those are just 3 of the many that exist. One of the things we have to consider investigatively is that our bad guys could be using a VoIP service for communication with our victim. So just because you get your bad guys and your victim's phone records from the cellular provider and you don't see phone calls between your victim and your suspect doesn't mean that those communications were not occurring. They very well could have been using some of these services like WhatsApp or Google Voice to make these phone calls both nationally and internationally, and there would be no record of that through the cellular carrier. So don't be confused if you don't see communications to the cellular carriers. I mentioned earlier geotagging. Geotagging is the process of adding geographical metadata to various media, such as photographs, videos, websites, or text messages. This data usually consists of longitude and latitude coordinates, and it may include the date and time the picture was taken, as well as the type of camera or device that took the picture. The data is then stored in what we call an exchangeable image file format, or Exif file, that's hidden in the image. So if I took a photo right now and I emailed it to you or I texted it to you, and you open that photo, you would not actually see the Exif file. You have to use what's called an Exif reader in order to see the geotag information, the metadata. Opanda is an example of a free online Exif reader. Exifdata.com is another online reader. Exif Tool is a downloadable app for your phone that you can download and look at photographs. And there are numerous other Exif readers that are in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And I would encourage you as your homework assignment to download an Exif reader in whichever device you have and look at some of your photographs and maybe look at some photographs that you've been sent from a friend. Exif file information can help us identify where photographs were taken based on the longitude and latitude of that image. It sometimes helps us put a bad guy in a certain location in proximity to our victim, and certainly if he has photographs that include our victim. And so Exif data can be extremely valuable. Google Earth will also read the Exif data and overlay the picture onto the map, showing you where it was taken. Just so you know, Facebook and the other social media apps will rip the Exif data for safety. So for the pictures that you may be posting on social media, you don't have to worry about somebody being able to capture the picture of your child or your dog and be able to figure out where you live using the Exif data because it's ripped. And so if that's important to you to get the geotag information, when you do your search warrant to Facebook, you will not want them to provide you the images in a PDF format, as we talked about earlier. You will need to request specifically the electronic files for the specific photos that you're concerned about so that you can pull the Exif data out of it. Okay, so we're running close on time. I'm going to run through this case real quick, and then we'll try to get into a few questions. This case involves a Kik Messenger. In this scenario, there was a 26-year-old guy by the name of Stephen Cox who lived in Columbus, Ohio. It just so happened that Mr. Cox was currently awaiting trial for unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor that he had convinced to come from Pennsylvania into Ohio, who he had had sex with. Subsequently, while he was out waiting trial for that case, he started communicating with 14-year-old Ruby Contreras, who lived in North Richland Hills, Texas, and convinced her to go away with him to Mexico. Cox had lured both of these girls via Kik Messenger. It was determined later by looking at his content from his device and his interviews that he had other girls he had in the wings, so to speak, that he was communicating with and had developed internet relationships and fully intended to exploit at some point in the future. So he had planned to travel and stay in Mexico if he needed to flee the U.S. Ultimately. So ultimately, Cox traveled to Texas via Greyhound bus, where he waited for Ruby outside of her middle school. He had instructed her how to pack her clothes in her backpack and so on and so forth. When she met him after school that day, and bear in mind, she obviously thought they were boyfriend-girlfriend. They had been communicating for some time online, which is oftentimes what we see. The bad guys, the exploiters, will develop a relationship with this young victim through social media. At some point, he had convinced her to give him her cell phone number, and they had moved off of Kick Messenger and were doing direct communication via text message through their cellular devices. Ultimately, they traveled by bus to El Paso, Texas. The first rape of her, sexual assault of her, happened on the Greyhound bus while they were traveling from Richland Hills, where she lived, down to El Paso. They spent several days in El Paso before traveling across to Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. Ruby told the police that she was abducted and repeatedly sexually assaulted by him. She knew she was in trouble when he took her cell phone away from her and broke the phone, took the battery out of it, and broke it so that it could not be tracked. So, again, he was smart enough to know that there was a possibility to track the cell phone. She confirmed that she had met Cox online, and she thought they were boyfriend and girlfriend. The original contact was through Kick Messenger, and that was verified later through Kick Messenger. And then they obviously had moved to private communication. Cox was ultimately arrested. It was a great case involving international cooperation between authorities in Texas and the Mexican police and Juarez. He was brought back to Fort Worth, Texas, which is the area where Richland Hills is, and he ultimately was sentenced to 50 years in prison in Texas on the kidnapping charge, and another 25 years to run consecutively for the 2 sexual assault counts. So he's looking at quite a bit of time in prison. Okay, that kind of takes us to a quick overview of our digital evidence course. As I said, today we've looked at social media issues. We have a 3-day digital evidence investigations course that consists of a basic concept section where we get into the whole issue in much more detail about digital evidence and where we can find digital evidence, whether it's devices, computers, third-party providers like these apps, or the internet and or cell phone providers. Then we have a whole 4-hour block on social media concepts and investigative strategies. We have a block on scene response dealing with cell phones. We have John Baer out of Tacoma, Washington, who is a forensic cell phone examiner who does about a 5-hour block on how do we handle cell phones and get digital evidence from them. As a first responder, how should we handle them, and what's the type of evidence that your forensic examiner should be able to get from them. We have a legal block that's taught by Dave Lewin. Dave's an assistant U.S. attorney out of Knoxville, Tennessee, and he teaches a 4.5-hour block on legal issues relative to cyber and relative to digital evidence. And then we have an afternoon block where we kind of bring it all together and talk about all the different pieces and give you some case studies to go over managing digital investigations. We provided the statistical resources for you. I will leave it to someone else on the call to talk about the webinars for OJJDP for the online university. Does anybody want to jump in now and talk about that before we start answering questions?
Yeah, so Bob, this is Melissa. So based on the volume of questions that we've been receiving so far, the discussion happening in the chat discussion board, and just the great interest on this topic, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take all these questions that we've gotten thus far and try to develop a resource or perhaps a part 2 to this series. And so I encourage people to continue to submit their questions, and we'll take that information in developing a future webinar. So I just wanted to thank you, Bob, again for this wonderful presentation. There's just so many questions that have been asked, and like I said, we're going to use this and the audience's feedback to develop a future training opportunity. So I just wanted to thank you all for participating. And before we close, I want to give a special thanks to Bob for joining us and let you all know that future webinar announcements from our Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program will be made in the coming weeks. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Carissa, who will talk about webinars on OJJDP's online university. Thank you.
Melissa, before we hand it over, if I could just say real quickly, I should have said, relative to that digital evidence investigations course, it's a 3-day course that we bring to you, and so you can work through Melissa or myself or through Fox Valley Technical College, who has the Amber Alert contract, in order to coordinate bringing this class to your location. We'd be happy to assist you in setting up the opportunity to host this 3-day course. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and also thank you, Bob, for this great discussion on this topic. We would like to apologize for the technical issue earlier in the beginning of the call and really appreciate everyone's patience as we work to resolve the problem. Very quick, we have a few brief reminders. The webinar will be archived in OJDP's online university in approximately 3 weeks. Let me go through, and for more information, please contact Fox Valley. You may also contact OJDP or NTAC via help desk by contacting the following information located on the slide. And lastly, we appreciate if you could please take 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey. And thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks.